Well, hello to you. Thank you for joining us on this live Q&A, whether you're joining us live or perhaps you are catching up a little bit later. I really appreciate you being here. Hopefully you've got some questions to ask me over the next period of time. We'll see how long we go, but I've got all morning over here in Sydney, so we can keep this going as long as we feel necessary. If you want to ask a question, YouTube has become something that I've become very familiar with over the last 6 or 8 months or so, but I'm wary that not everybody knows. But if you want to ask a question, go to the comments below and you can tap your question in there. We'll bring it up on screen and I'll do my best to answer it over the next period of time as well. So thank you for all of that. I'm operating the equipment all myself here, which is amazing. I'm very clever how it all works, but bear with me because I have to press a lot of buttons as well as talking to you as well. For example, I could do that. You see, there we are. So things like that will happen during the live Q&A as well. But if you've got any questions you want to ask me about my time covering Nottingham Forest, whether it was the 20 years I was there, plenty happened in that time, I think it's fair to say, whether it's about the situation as it is at the moment, which looks pretty good from over here. I'd love to hear your questions. As I say, get to the comments below and ask a question and I'll do my best to answer it. Bryn has asked the first question. Thank you to you, Bryn. Who was your favourite Forest manager to work with and why? Lots were really good to work with. One or two were less than good, shall we say, but let's concentrate on the good ones. A lot of time for Paul Hart, the second Forest manager I worked with. He was brilliant to work with. Really enjoyed my time with him. Could be a difficult, challenging interview at times and, wasn't always the best, performer, if you like, but almost a different era back then, 20 years ago. He was... it's amazing how actually football has changed in that 20 years. But I really like working with Paul Hart. I learnt so much from Sean O'Driscoll as a manager. Real shame that he was only there for 6 months or so. Actually ridiculous that he was only there for 6 months or so, given what he achieved and where it felt like Forest were going at the time. But he was really good on a personal level, but also on a professional level as well. You'd go to the training ground to interview him ahead of the weekend's game, whether that was on a Thursday or a Friday, and you'd spend an hour or two in his office afterwards just chatting about football. And I learned so much from him about the kind of the structure of the game, if you like, and also the psychology of the game. I thought he was really good at that. Certainly impressed me. And that was really good to deal with. So I liked Sean. Colin Calderwood, one of the nicest men in football you could ever wish to meet. To be honest, most of the Forest managers, Steve Cottrell was good as well. We had our ups and downs as media and a manager with him. And I remember him phoning up one day and just shouting down the phone. I can't even remember what it was about, but he was brilliant in many ways. I felt a bit sorry for him that he lost his job actually at a time when he'd done pretty well amidst the carnage to keep Forest up. But you have ups and downs with all different types of managers. Caretaker-wise, Gary Brazil was always good to work with. Known Gary for over 20 years since when he started at Notts County. There were plenty actually who were very good to work with. Some of them were disappointing. I've said this before, but Mark Warburton, I thought he'd be really good to work with from a media perspective. And I thought he was a perfect fit for Forest at the time. But there wasn't much small talk. There wasn't much. It was difficult to get behind the mask, if you like, of being a football manager with Mark, which was, a bit disappointing, to be honest. Thank you for your question, Bryn. Really appreciate that. Next one, Mike says, are you planning on returning to the UK at some point? Oh, certainly, to not necessarily full time. I'm not planning to come back permanently. This is home. I've kind of made my decision, and this is what we're going to do. But certainly, I'll come back at some point in the future, obviously to visit friends, family, more importantly, and no doubt we'll see plenty of friends in Nottingham when I get the opportunity to come back. So yes, but this is home now. I think that would be fair to say. Howard says, memories of working with Colin Slater. It's been a really tough week, actually, or just, exactly a week, I think, since I woke up and found the news out about Colin Slater. Much has been said already. A great man to work with, and his connections. The thing about Colin is, the thing about football people generally in the media is many of them are either fantastic commentators, really good broadcasters about the game, or they're good journalists and dig out stories, transfer news, manager sackings, that kind of thing. The thing about Colin was he was all of those things. And, the enormous respect that he had from within the game. And you've seen that kind of outpouring over the last week. And I think that says an awful lot. I travelled, I would imagine he would dread to think how many miles we travelled up and down the country together. I mentioned this on Radio Nottingham the other day, but I was always keen to drive. He had so many strengths, Colin, but driving was not one of them. And famously, there was a story. Fortunately, I wasn't in the car, but Dean Yates, a former Notts defender, was part of the commentary team, and with Colin driving, when they got out of the car at Torquay, Dean famously got out and kissed the ground. So grateful he was that he'd actually made it. But yeah, he was a bit erratic as a driver. But bizarrely, it's probably the only thing in his whole life he was erratic about, because, as I say, everything else was absolutely professional to a T. So many fond memories of Colin. The other thing is, we had times where he would go out of his way to find food and find the restaurants that he had built up a relationship almost with over his nearly 50 years covering Notts. So we'd go out of our way. If we were covering a game in say Rochdale or Carlisle in the northwest, we would go via Bradford, because there was a fantastic fish and chip restaurant that he loved just on the outskirts of Bradford. So we would do that. And there was another one just near Bristol on the M5 that whenever we were going southwest, it was a bit of a treat, because we'd be able to call in at the restaurant on the way down, and we'd allow extra time. But, great guy, fantastic guy, Colin Slater, and obviously will be very, very sadly missed by the Notts community, but also by the sports community in Nottingham generally. I remember when I moved up from Essex, what was that, 1999, I was told by people, who had not much to do with Nottingham, if anything. And they were told that, or I was told that when I moved to Nottingham, I'd have to be able to do two impressions. One was Brian Clough, and the other was Colin Slater, because everybody in Nottingham knew who he was. And that is absolutely true. Everybody in Nottingham knew who he was. So I noticed the details of his funeral have been announced today. If you want to have a look, the Notts County website or BBC Nottingham Sport have all the details of that, as you would expect. But it's been a very sad week, actually. Really sad week. Trying to get to grips with what has happened. Right, let's make our way through more of your questions. How do you think the current Forest team compares to others you've seen? From Mark. Thank you for that, Mark. Pretty well, I'd say, from what I've seen over the last couple of months. The turnaround has been extraordinary, really. Absolutely extraordinary. And I know, often when a manager went in at Forest, I'd think, oh, that seems a good fit. Sean O'Driscoll seemed a good fit. Mark Warburton seemed a good fit. It just seemed to feel right. But it hasn't always worked out that way. I thought Chris Hughton would do a good job, a better job, certainly, than he did. I didn't think it would be necessarily overly pretty, but I thought it would be much more effective than it turned out to be, given his CV and his record. So I was a bit sad about that, because I thought that would work out. I thought they've got an experienced Championship manager in Chris Hughton, but for whatever reason, it didn't. But the turnaround with Steve Cooper is amazing, and it's fantastic to see how quickly fans have got on board with him, and perhaps how quickly he's got on board with fans as well, by making changes, attacking football, winning games, obviously, But all of that certainly helps, and it just kind of builds into that momentum. And if fans are annoyed or not overly wrapped, as they would say out here, with a managerial appointment, it feels like an uphill task from the beginning. I think what we have seen is the benefit of supporters being on side with Steve Cooper largely from the beginning. So I think the team looks pretty good. I do like the signing of Keenan Davis. I've got to say that, for a bit of competition, and maybe we've seen that bring a bit out of Lewis Graben over the past couple of weeks as well. So things are looking good. Actually, perhaps you can answer some questions whether you think Forest can at least make the playoffs. That seems pretty good, actually. Pretty good chance of that coming up. Should tell you as well about membership of the channel as well. Just want to mention this because I've changed the conditions for membership, and things have changed about that and the benefits you get from being a member of Chippers Club. If you want to join Chippers Club, there's always a link in the descriptions of all the videos down below. So if you want to join Chippers Club, feel free to do that. But if you are a member of Chippers Club, you can see right now an interview with Mark Crossley, which is fantastic. He does some brilliant Brian Clough impressions, great stories as well of his time at Nottingham Forest, how he made his debut, how he found out about that. Fantastic story. So if you are a member, I know you've been enjoying the stories that Mark has to tell. But I've made the changes so that there are no YouTube ads, and I know it peed a lot of people off, all the adverts for YouTube. So if you are a member of Chippers Club, you'll see the interviews without the adverts. There are various categories of membership as well. But if you're gold or silver member, you'll see the interviews a week now ahead of non-members and bronze members as well. So that might be a bit of a benefit for you as well. Anyway, I've popped the link in the description below, as I say. If you want to have a look, they range the prices. Bronze member is $1.99 a month, pounds, not dollars, and gold is $5.99 a month. And as I say, for a gold membership, you get no YouTube adverts. You see the full length extended interviews. You'll see them a week before non-members, and you get a credit on the video as well. I give you my thanks on the video. So in advance, thank you if you want to sign up. As I say, link is in the description below. Let's make our way back to some of your comments. Let's go to Bryn has had one already, so let's move on to David. David says, away from Nottingham Forest, even though we all love the stories, what had an interview with Alex Hales. I could see that being pretty good as well. Yeah, he's in Sydney. Not a bad idea, actually. He spends a lot of time on the golf course from what I've seen on his Instagram. I think his golf handicap, which was pretty good to start with, is even better. But he's doing good things with the Sydney Thunder out here in the Big Bash. Matt says, match day isn't the same without you. I don't know what I'd do if Colin ever left. Which team do you support? Thank you, Matt. Appreciate the kind comments. I think match day isn't the same, or hasn't been the same, because of bloody COVID. And I know it's been really difficult for everybody, well, around the world, but particularly in the UK. And I think that's made it, difficult in terms of where people can go and all sorts of things. I don't know what I'd do if Colin ever left. I can't imagine Colin ever leaving. Don't worry about it. Which team did you support, Matt? Well, my team's Southend, who are, I think, towards the top of the Premier League at the moment. Or in actual fact, they're towards the bottom of the National League. But things are picking up, I'm pleased to say. But obviously, working in Nottingham for 20 years, Forest and Notts became my second and third teams, if you like. Given how much you follow and you get to know people and supporters, it's always easier covering a team if they're doing well rather than if they're doing badly. I mean, you might get a few headlines if a team's doing badly, but generally you get more listeners and you get more engagement on social media if a team is doing well. Mitchell has donated. Thank you, Mitchell. That's very kind of you. You can do that as well if you want to. You don't have to. But if you go to the comments, you'll see where you're about to type in a comment, there's a little $sign there that then you do a super chat. As I say, I'm getting used to YouTube. You get a super chat and that's where you can make a donation if you want to. If you don't want to join as a member, for example, and support the channel that way, you can make a donation. That would be very much appreciated. Thank you in advance for that. Mike, what are your thoughts about the current situation Derby find themselves in? Well, as a local rival, it's, you want to see the other team struggling, frankly. But I don't want to see any team go out of business. Whoever it is, you just don't want to see it. And I know some Forest fans will think, great, love it if they did. But think of the joy you've got as a Forest fan and the misery, but think particularly of the joy in games against Derby down the years. The 5-2 win, the Earnshaw goal at Pride Park. There's so great occasions. I wouldn't want to miss those. If Derby went down to League One for a couple of years, Forest had that as well. No problem. You reap what you sow, and they deserve punishment for what they did in breaking the rules. But I wouldn't want to see them go down. I think that would be terrible. I would want to see them go down. I wouldn't want to see them go out of business. I think that would be terrible for football generally. And I appreciate that they are businesses, and you reap what you sow. They deserve some punishment, but going out of business, I think, would be too much. Carl, during your 20 years covering Forest, who would be your top five worst referees? Who's the chap at West Brom? Keith something? Chap at West Brom in a 2-2 draw when Matty Cash scored late. He was pretty bad. Generally, I try not to have a go at referees because Keith. All that comes to mind is Keith Floyd. Keith Stroud. Keith Stroud was his name. He was pretty bad. But I try not to generally have a go at referees because, I do from time to time. But everybody makes mistakes, and they're the only neutral people in the ground. So they're generally doing their best, but sometimes they're bad, and sometimes they have if there's a ball that goes out of play on the halfway line and it's a 50-50 call, or you're absolutely convinced it should be a Notts throw or a Forest throw, and they give it the other way, and that's a mistake. I don't have too many issues with that. Throws on the halfway line, in the grand scheme of things, not massive. But it's the big decisions you want them to get right. Keith Stroud that night did not have the best of games, but generally they're okay. You won't agree with every decision, but as I say, they are doing their best, and they are pretty neutral as well. James, who was worse to deal with, Megson or Kinnear? Neither were bad, actually, to be fair. I never really got to know Gary Megson in the, kind of behind the microphone type way. But obviously had a pretty wretched time at the City Ground. Joe Kinnear was actually great fun. Became a bit of a comedic character towards the end. But until that game at Derby, I think I'm pretty right in saying he turned up every interview. I can't remember, until he became caretaker manager, interviewing Mick Harford very often as caretaker manager. So he always would front up, and he'd always have something to say. You might not like it, and you might not necessarily believe it about signings and Jasper Hackinson he was going to sign. And when we looked it up in the office, nobody could find a player called Jasper Hackinson, but it wasn't right. And how he got names wrong. Jean-Louis Paul when he meant Matthew Louis Jean, and all that sort. He was hysterical. He was very funny to deal with. I remember a game at Leeds. I think Forest had lost. I assume Forest had lost. And he said at the time that post-match that he'd agreed to deal with Tottenham to sign a couple of players on the Monday. They'll be in my office on Monday, he said. Anyway, the one of the Forest hierarchy, the admin staff, was listening. And so dutifully and correctly got things in order to make a couple of signings on the Monday, paperwork and that kind of thing. Went in to see Joe and said, what's going on the Monday? Who are we signing? I've got some paperwork ready. And Joe said, oh, no, don't worry about that. It's absolute rubbish. I just needed to create a diversion. That's what he was like. You couldn't necessarily believe everything he said, but He was good fun in many ways. Let's make our way through some of your comments. From Vaughan, Chippers, miss seeing you walk past my office with your Starbucks. Yeah, I used to do that quite a lot. Hope Oz is treating you well. If Forest made the playoff final, would you try and get back and watch it in person? Now, that's an interesting question. I hadn't actually contemplated that. But that is a thought. I wouldn't rule it out. That would be end of May, wouldn't it? So that's a real possibility. Hadn't thought of that. Maybe I could do a Nottingham Forest double. Keep your comments coming. If you are just joining us, go to the comments below and leave a comment. As I say, you can also leave a super chat there, which will help the channel going forward as well. More of your comments. Bez says, are you able to watch Forest live on TV? And did you listen to Colin on his commentaries? Your thoughts on Colin Slater? Bez, you obviously joined us late. I talked about Colin Slater a little bit earlier. I do watch some Forest games. Some of them are shown over here. It's a bit hit and miss, actually. We get what's called the world feed. So I can't hear Colin, unfortunately, whether he's with Suts or Hodgie or Lawsy or whoever. But we do get like hit and miss games. I was watching, I saw the Arsenal game, obviously, that was shown over here. And there was Huddersfield game, randomly was shown at home, I think. So you get Middlesbrough as well, I think. You get to see one or two games. It's all a bit hit and miss. Carl says, will you ever get Brian Laws to tell us the John Aldridge story that he promised us? I should get Lawsy on, shouldn't I, actually, as somebody to chat to. Whether he tells the John Aldridge story, I don't know. But we'll see. AH says, not exactly Forest related. Have you had any run-ins with the wildlife in Australia yet? No, we've not, because of COVID, we've not really left Sydney an awful lot, or certainly within 3 or 4 hours of Sydney. A few spiders, but certainly nothing poisonous or nothing major that has frightened us in any way so far. So that's the situation as far as that is concerned. Just fiddling around with the computer here. Bear with me a second, making sure everything is okay. Right, on with some more of your comments. Another one from Bryn. He says, do you get to watch football in Australia? And what is the standard like? Watch a bit of the, it's called the A-League Men's over here and the A-League Women as well. Watch a bit of that. I think they're finding it pretty tough with COVID as well. I've got to say, because fixtures are being cancelled left, right and centre. And this season feels like it's struggling to build a bit of momentum because of that. Standards okay, actually. You can get some. I've seen a couple of really good games. Western Sydney, was it last weekend at Melbourne City? Was a really good game. Finished 3-3. So that was good. And there was another game earlier that also finished 3-3. That was a brilliant watch as well. Nicole, would you return back to Nottingham at any stage? Mentioned earlier, yes, I would to visit. But not necessarily to live. This feels like, unless anything massive changes, obviously. That's not in the plan. Orzel, excuse me if I've mispronounced that. Has Billy Davis agreed to give you an interview yet? To be honest, I've not asked. And Lee, on a similar subject, says, would you interview Billy Davis again if he called and apologised for his antics? Yeah, probably. Excuse me a sec. Even the thought of it is making me choke up a bit. Yeah. I mean, I don't think life is too short, isn't it? But as I mentioned before, pretty torrid year. I mean, it was a pretty horrible year, and not to have an explanation was not fun. I didn't think it was very gentlemanly. But yeah, if he did, yeah, no problem. We'd move on with life. I think it's he's moved on with life. I don't know what he's doing now. Not in football, obviously, but yeah, there was no need for it. And the thing is, I suffered because it was a horrendous year. It was absolutely dreadful covering Forest that year because you just couldn't do your job. But you, the fans, suffered more than than anybody, really, because we couldn't bring you interviews with managers and players, and we were restricted in where we could go and everything. Oh, it was just a battle. Everything was a battle. So I mean, I'm certainly not going to reach out. So for those who ask about interviews with Billy going forward, not going to happen, I'm afraid. Certainly not from my perspective anyway. Vaughan, what was the greatest goal you got to witness at the City Ground over your time covering them? I think you go a long way to beat Lewis McGugan against Ipswich. Simon Cox against Birmingham was very good. There is an interview with Simon on the channel, actually, which is really good. I think you'd enjoy that if you've not seen it yet. Plenty of chats with Simon Cox and all sorts of people going back. Andy Reid, Joe Worrell's very good. Chris Cohen, trying to think off the top of my head, Robbie Earnshaw, Gary Brazil, Colin Calderwood, Sean O'Driscoll, Paul Evans is very interesting from his time under Kinnear and Mexico. Anyway, if you haven't subscribed yet to the channel, do so, because you'll find plenty of interesting interviews, I think, there. But Simon Cox, I think, will be very good. He talks about the goal right at the beginning of that interview against Birmingham. Pass from McGugan, if memory serves, from right out on the right-hand side. Cox controlled it in one motion, and then I think before the ball had hit the ground, he lifted it over the keeper, who was Jack Butland. So that was really good. So I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the McGugan goal against Ipswich. Probably more important goals that weren't great goals, if you like. I mean, obviously the Cohen goal against Ipswich was a good goal, but it wasn't a great goal, but it meant so much. So that would be one. Dexter Blackstock against Bristol City. Again, not a great goal, but a great goal in terms of its importance as well. So they're probably some of the great goals. David, how are the Aussies taking the cricket against our embarrassing England team? I think they're just, and this might surprise you, I don't know, but I think they're just really disappointed that England haven't put up a bit more of a fight. This is a good Australian team, but it's not a great Australian team. They have weaknesses, which England haven't exploited at all. And England have been so pathetic with the bat that it's not giving them a chance. I thought, 70 for no wicket last night, or none for 70. I thought there was a chance of putting some pressure on the Aussies last night. And then the moment that they lost a wicket, it was bang, 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 and suddenly all the cards fell. Coming back to the Aussies, I think they want more of a fight. They just want more of a contest, particularly over here. They're good series, close series in England, but over here in difficult and different conditions, England haven't won a test match for 10 years. And it's going to be 14 by the time it rolls around again. And obviously Australia haven't won a series in England for 20 years, which doesn't somehow get mentioned as much over here. I don't know why. But there we are. They're just disappointed that it's not been more of a contest, I think. Let's go through more of your comments. Keep them coming. If you are just joining us, comments in the... I think it's to the right. But just if you go to comments, you can ask a question in there. Also, if you want to super chat and make a donation, where you go to make your comment, there's a $sign right next to it. And you can donate to the channel via super chat if you enjoy what I do. I want to support it going forward and help as well me to spend more time and effort on the channel. Things like, for example, this streaming thing with all the graphics and everything costs a chunk. I think it's about £25 a month or something for this. So there are microphones and lights and everything. So it does cost a bit of money. Anyway, Thomas, who is a gold member of Chippers Club. Thank you, Thomas. Robin, why did you leave the BBC? Just to change your scenery? Yes, exactly that, really. I've done it for 25 years, really, in Nottingham and Essex. And it was good. I enjoyed my time, loved covering, on a Saturday afternoon, being at football. And I think being in Nottingham, it felt like it really mattered to so many people, which was brilliant. But it was just time for a change of scenery. I'd come to Australia on holiday probably 25 years ago, 30 years ago. No, 25 years ago. I'm not that old. And always loved it. Just loved the climate, the attitude of people, everything about the place, really. And I remember thinking at the time, gosh, I'd love to live there. That would be amazing if I could live there and work there. And sport is obviously a big part of life in Australia as well. So just a change of scenery. Got fortunate visa-wise and was able to come in. Carl, who is a gold member as well. Thank you, Carl. What's your opinion on VAR? Do you think that it's taking over the match official's job? Yes, it is to a certain extent. I don't like the fact that you can't really, in the Premier League anyway, and some FA Cup games, you can't always celebrate a goal knowing that it's going to be a goal, which I don't like. I'd have VAR for some things. I have no issue with goal line technology. It's a fact. I thought offside was a fact, but that's becoming a matter of opinion. I think it was Jurgen Klopp who had the idea about offsides, that, and I've heard two streams of thought on this, that you make the lines thicker for offside, and if the attacker is kind of within that line, because at the moment they're kind of very pencil thin lines, but if you make them much thicker, and the attacker was within that zone, if you like, then he was onside, and you would allow the goal if it was a goal. The other thought I've had is get rid of the lines completely, and if you can't tell within 5 seconds whether a player is offside, then it stands. The decision on field stands, whatever that decision was. And I quite like that idea because you boil it down to a minute figure, and I watch it and I think, if you're a striker, you're always told to be on the shoulder of the defender, and just because your shoulder might be just a fraction in front, I don't think that's right. It doesn't feel right in those offside scenarios. So I think getting rid of the lines completely is probably the best thing. As I say, if you can't tell in 5 seconds, you stay with the on-field decision. In cricketing terms, umpire's call. Joe, would you say you got close enough to any of the managers or players to call them friends, or was it always on a professional basis? Yeah, some of them. Some of them I would call friends and still keep in touch with now. And you've seen some of those on the channel over recent weeks. And months as well. Calderwood, I would say, O'Driscoll as well, Cottrell to a certain extent. There aren't many I wouldn't talk to now. Somebody mentioned earlier in the chat, if one of them phoned up and apologised, then okay, let's get on with life. But I certainly wouldn't go out of my way to deal with one. Probably guess who that is. But the others, absolutely fine. And all of them, apart from one, were businesslike. I mentioned Mark Warburton earlier, who I thought would be a really good fit for Forest. He was very businesslike, but couldn't really get behind that, not charade, but he couldn't really break down the barrier to get to a human being, if you like, which I thought was a real shame. I think if Mark had shown a bit more of that side, and everybody at the club and people I've spoken to speak very well about Mark Warburton as a person and as a football person. But it was difficult to kind of break down that that barrier that seemed to be there, I think. Mark, who from memory is a gold member as well. Thank you for your continuing support, Mark. Did people non-playing staff sign NDAs, non-disclosure agreements after leaving Forest under Fawaz? I've heard that things were a lot worse behind the scenes than we knew, but we've never heard either them or since. I would imagine a few did. Chief executives, people who are pretty high in the club, but that's pretty standard. I would be surprised if they didn't, frankly. Players obviously didn't, because players have talked about it on the channel. Andy Reid talks about it. Chris Cohen talks about it. Simon Cox talks about it as well, and how difficult it was. Yes, I think I'm 99.9% certain, without having seen contracts, obviously, that some signed NDAs as part of their departure. But I wouldn't think all of them did. I might be wrong. Next question, keep them coming. Evie says, what was it like reporting on the Forest Birmingham game and the fallout that followed with McLaren and Doughty both stepping down? That was a Sunday afternoon, wasn't it? Forest were dreadful and the atmosphere was awful at the game, and the chance obviously for Nigel Doughty to go and McLaren to go. And obviously both of those things happened in the aftermath of the game. I remember feeling it was really sad, actually, that the club had got to that point. And, it's a pretty honourable thing of Nigel Doughty to do, actually. He put his hands up and said, look, if your paying customers don't want you, then it's time to go. And also, I made the appointment of McLaren. And therefore, I made the misjudgment. But yeah, it just felt really sad. McLaren felt like it was the wrong time for him to be Forest manager. And you might say there was never a good time, but he's obviously a good coach. A lot of people talk about how good he was as a coach, not necessarily at Forest, actually, because obviously he was only there a month or so. And I would always be in the camp that gave managers time. But it just felt right. I mean, it wasn't getting any better. And I know it had only been a month, but it just felt like something needed to change. And obviously it did. But a long night. I don't think Facebook Lives were going then, but I remember staying on air an extra hour because McLaren hadn't come out post-match to do an interview, and it felt like we probably needed to stay on air to cover developments, and we did for another game. AH says, how much contact would you typically have with the opposition's match day correspondent? Were there any you got to know particularly well? Yeah, quite a few, actually. And lots of those have become friends over time. Guys at Radio Derby, we talked about Derby earlier in the chat, in the live chat. Guys at Radio Derby were always good to deal with. Leeds as well. I'm trying to think. All over to be honest, all of them over the country. There weren't many that certainly didn't get on with, and you'd chat to them because they you sort of keep in touch with during the week, because often you'd hear about transfers and that kind of thing, because if a player was coming to Forest or Notts County or Mansfield or whoever, you generally hear about it from the inverted commas selling club before the buying club. That's generally how it worked. And it worked the other way as well. You'd hear about a player leaving Forest, maybe a young player going to Southend or Port Vale or Ipswich or whoever. And you'd hear about it before the player, the club who he was joining. Just the way it worked, really, because, people have, I suppose, looser lips if a player is leaving than if he's joining. So, yeah, it's very useful to keep in touch with people during the week, and they would keep in touch with you as well. So generally kept a lot in contact with BBC people, but also with newspaper people who around the country would tell you one or two things as well. Jigsy says, why did the players turn on Martin O'Neill? Again, that was another real disappointment for me, because it was two Forest people, if you like, I really wanted to interview. Well, Martin O'Neill and Roy Keane. Now, Keane didn't make himself available or didn't want to do any interviews as assistant, which for me was a real shame, because it would have been an absolute joy to interview Roy Keane. It was a joy to interview Martin O'Neill. Very thoughtful man, very intelligent man, great to interview. And again, he wasn't there very long, but got on pretty well with him in that short period of time. I found it really sad. Now, the kind of briefings that had come out afterwards was that some players didn't get on with him. I've spoken to a couple who did get on with him and found him absolutely fine. So I don't know, but whether players felt they wanted to go in a different direction, whether he was too disciplinarian, I don't know. But as I say, some of them clearly didn't rate him or didn't appreciate his methods. Training methods, but I know I spoke to two, possibly three, off the top of my head. It was 3 years ago now, that were fine with it. So, you read stories and you choose what to believe. Let's get through some more of your comments. There's a few, actually. I do miss West Bridgford. It's where I lived when I was in the UK for, was in Nottingham rather, for 15 years. I've got to try and remember the thing is, my memory's so bad, but there are a couple I liked. Parlour was good. I like Parlour, just near the Co-op in Bridgford. Of all the things I thought I'd be talking about, the Co-op in West Bridgford isn't one of them. What's the name of the bar that was owned by a guy who played for Forest a bit? Matty Turner. It's called Zinc, I think. Zinc. There's a good few bars in West Bridgford that I frequented from time to time. Let's move on. We don't need to talk about that. Talk Forest says, if there was one Forest commentary that always comes to mind straight away, what would it be? Sheffield United in the Championship playoff semi-final, second leg. Should tell you, actually, incidentally, a bit of an exclusive for the Q&A. Michael Dawson will be on the channel in the next week or so. I mentioned earlier that Mark Crossley is there for members right now. So if you sign up to be a member of Chippers Club, link in the description below, you can see the interview with Mark Crossley. Hopefully you'll wait till after this live chat. But Michael Dawson will be on for members later this week. It's Monday here, so later this week, Thursday time for members, Michael Dawson. And then for non-members, a week later. I wasn't going to mention that, but thinking about that Championship playoff semi-final, we talk about that with Dawes, actually. It's a really good chat. You'll really enjoy that, as I say, if you remember, in a few days. But that Championship playoff semi-final was hugely disappointing, obviously. And if Dawes had played in that second leg, if he'd not been sent off by Clattenburg, history of Forest might be completely different. Who knows? But that game at Bramall Lane was just extraordinary. And I know there were similar kinds of games against Yeovil and Blackpool, also in playoff semi-final second legs. But that game at Bramall Lane was, if you were a neutral watching that game, it was absolutely unbelievable. The atmosphere was fantastic. The game was brilliant. The quality was really high. And it had everything. So in terms of games of football I've actually watched, that was brilliant. Stuart Pearce emerging from the tunnel for his first time as Forest manager, that was a magnificent day. Forest won the game. I don't remember the game being particularly brilliant, but I just remember thinking, geez, that is some noise. And Cohen's goal against Ipswich to effectively keep Forest in the Championship was amazing as well. Just great days. The game against Yeovil to get up from League One. I mean, Forest have achieved some amazing things in their history, and to get up from League One should never be perhaps viewed as such a great achievement. But it was. And it was a brilliant day. It was a magnificent day. With scores elsewhere, people listening to the radio and cheering when the goals were scored. I was feeding Colin Calderwood scores and updates about what was happening at the other game, Cheltenham-Doncaster. Actually, again, if you haven't seen the interview with Colin Calderwood yet, we chat loads about that particular day as well. So it's those kind of, there weren't great seasons necessarily. There was only one promotion season in my 20-odd years covering Forest. So there weren't those great seasons necessarily. And even that promotion season had a fair few downs in it. But there were great moments. There were great days. And the game against Ipswich, after all the crap that there'd been in the season before, was a great day. The game at Sheffield United was a fantastic occasion. So there were, those kind of moments, if you like, and you kind of lived for those days. Sense is a gold member. Hi, Chippers. How do you rate the current setup at Forest, i.e. manager, CEO and playing staff? Everything I hear about CEO is excellent. I don't know him at all. I've not spoken to him, nor should I. But everything you hear is really good about the way it's working now. The manager is obviously fitted in perfectly. CEO who has a good handle on English football by all accounts. And the playing staff as well. I mean, the turnaround from, what was it, bottom of the table after 8 games with 1 point. Is that right? Extraordinary turnaround. And you just feel that everybody's on board and things are moving in the right direction. Carl is a gold member as well. Wonder if you could do an interview with Alan Rogers. He has a lot of stories to tell from working under Harry Bassett, Platt, Kinnear and Megson. Thank you, Carl. I'll add him to the list. If you've got any suggestions of people to talk to, I've got a bit of a list going and I'm kind of working my way through them very slowly. As I say, Mark Crossley there for you now. If you remember, Michael Dawson will be later in the week. Dominic says, think you'll be able to get Sabri on the podcast? I would hope so. Again, without wishing to use a cliche I use quite a lot, he is on the list. Joe says, did you find the huge rise in social media the period you covered Forest a bit of a pain? And did I ever contribute to forums anonymously? No, is the answer to that second bit. Yes, a bit of a pain, Joe, social media, but also often a good thing as well. Remember Forest beat Derby 5-2 and the first, the A52 and all that. The first I kind of latched onto that. I saw it on Twitter. Somebody had mentioned it on Twitter. And so then we were able to talk about it on the radio afterwards. And it may have occurred to me at some point. It might have occurred to Colin or Hodgie or whoever was it. I think it was John McGavin at the time, was in the commentary box. But things like that is quite useful for. And also to gauge sometimes what fans were thinking after a game. And, sometimes I'd nip on in the immediate aftermath of a game to find out what the issues were that fans wanted asking about, why somebody wasn't playing, perhaps why a substitution was made, and it wouldn't alter what I was saying or asking, but it would just kind of give me a bit of an idea about the issues that supporters might want answered. So yes. Some really bad times as well on social media, let's be honest. Some of it was absolute, particularly in that Billy Davies era, was just ridiculous. Anyway, let's not dwell on that. Thomas, could you try and get Darren Fletcher on your channel? That would be a treat regarding memories. Yes, Thomas, I will. That's a good idea. It's a good lad, Fletch. So, yes. Mark, Brendan Johnson, any rumour as to what price Forest want for him? Brentford fan. Thank you, Mark. Forest going to let him go? Given where they are at the moment, momentum? I'm not sure. Depends if they need to do one of those things that keeps them on the right side of the regulations in terms of selling a player, which obviously they tend to do every year to kind of balance with FFP. I'm not close enough at the moment to know anymore really what the situation is FFP wise and where they are. If anybody knows any more, comment on here. But Brendan Johnson is obviously absolutely crucial. The goals I see, goal against Arsenal, the goal against Millwall at the weekend, all come down that right hand side from Brendan Johnson. I know Ryan Yates crossed for Graben for the goal, but it's Johnson picks the ball up. It was Johnson that picked the ball up on Saturday at Millwall. So yeah, he's a very in-demand player, I would think. I'd be amazed if, I don't know anything, but I'd be amazed if Forest sold him. As I say, being over here and not covering them anymore, I'm not in the loop in terms of players coming or going. But I'd be surprised if they sold him, particularly given how well they're doing. Dom says, we know you're a Southend fan. Would you consider yourself a Forest fan as well? Yeah, absolutely. Having covered them for 20 years, absolutely. Just as Notts County as well. You obviously want to see them all win. You want to see them win promotion. I mean, Notts County back in the league. ASAP, please. Ridiculous they're in the conference. But yes, absolutely, a Forest fan and a Notts fan as well. JV says, what do you think Houghton got so wrong? As far as I understand, his football was never pretty, but it had got him results in the past. Yes, absolutely. No idea. Some people have suggested he was a bit stubborn, wouldn't change formation. That's a real shame. Again, as with so many, I thought it was a very decent appointment at the time. Championship experience, promotions on his CV, but obviously it never worked out. Thomas, did you have to chat to Brian Clough when he did co-commentary with Fletch for Century in 2003? No, I don't remember him doing a game. Happy to be corrected on that. Did Brian Clough? I don't remember him doing a Forest game. Did he? He might have done a Leicester or Derby game with Fletch for Century back in 2003. I never met Brian Clough, which was a real shame. I would have loved to. So no, I'll be. Tom, you may remember better than me, but I don't remember him doing commentary on a Forest game with Fletch. Maybe he did Leicester or Derby, as I say. There we are. Thomas says, think it was Derby. Oh, v Derby. No, unless my memory's gone completely, I don't remember him being at a Forest game doing commentary. Andrew says, obviously you got paid to watch Forest, but which Forest team player would you have paid to watch? That's an interesting question. Well, I'd love to go back in time and obviously cover the European days. Can you imagine? That would be pretty good. Colin was the one I would pay to watch, and did when he was at Southend for a bit. He only played 33 games, 18 goals, I think, for Southend. Just the best player I've ever seen live. Just magnificent. So yes, Colin Moore, I would think. Talk Forest. Whilst you were with Radio Nottingham Sport, what was your top sporting highlight? I mentioned some Forest games, some Notts games as well. I remember the game against Huddersfield when they stayed up to complete the Great Escape, 15,000 inside Meadow Lane. That was good. Frotch fights were brilliant around the world and in the UK as well. Very fortunate to cover Frotch in, let's think, Atlantic City a couple of times, Connecticut once, Finland once, Denmark once. Drove to Denmark, actually, because of the Icelandic volcano or volcanic cloud that had grounded planes. So myself and Mark Shardlow from East Midlands Today, we drove to Denmark to cover the fight against Mikkel Kessler, which was amazing. We didn't drive the whole way. We got the train to Brussels. Is that right? Train to Brussels from St Pancras, and then drove from Brussels overnight to Denmark to cover the fight. So that was pretty special. Mike, would love to hear an interview with Stan Collymore. Thanks, Mike. He's agreed to do it. Agreed some time ago, actually. So we're going to try and sort out dates and sort something out. So hopefully that'll be coming up soon. Vaughan says Wes Morgan would be a good one to do. To use a phrase, he is on the list. Matthew says, what did you think to Greg Halford? That's odd. Thought he was all right. Thought he was fine. Good, intelligent guy to chat to, actually. Played up front, didn't he, for Billy Davis for a bit, which had some mixed success. It worked to start with, and then sometimes it didn't. Dominic says, any Forest managers you got nervous about interviewing due to them being a difficult person? No, I don't think. No, the one I was most nervous with to start with was Martin O'Neill, just because he's somebody I always wanted to interview. But again, he was so disarming that didn't last very long. But it was a real thrill to interview. Martin got on. I liked him an awful lot. As I say, very intelligent man to talk to. I can't think of any others. I don't think any of them were difficult. Maybe apart from one. and I never interviewed him in the second spell, as you all know. So, yeah, I don't think any of them were difficult. Mark says, Martin Fisher would be interesting to hear about his time covering Forest. Mark, you are in luck. You are in luck because I interviewed Martin pretty early on, and actually in the channel, within the first month or so. Again, if you want to see any, I mentioned earlier about the link to join Chippers Club being in the description below. I also put a link to all the previous videos in the description below as well. So you can sign up for Chippers Club and see things like the videos with no YouTube adverts, the full-length videos, see them a week before non-members, and get a credit on the video as well. So the link is there. But as I say, the link to all the previous videos are also in the description below. So you'll see the interview with Martin there. Colin Frey's there. I'm trying to think. I think Colin was first person I spoke to on the channel. Did a bit of a Q&A with him, and the Fish is there. Plenty of other people. David Johnson. Anyway, they're all linked in the description below. So fill your boots. More RD says, why did it never work out for Xiao Carvalho? Yeah, I don't know, because there were times when he looked brilliant, weren't there? That game against Middlesbrough from memory at the City Ground under Martin O'Neill, bizarrely, just magnificent. And times he looked brilliant. I think he's the sort of player you have to build a side around, and I don't think Forest managers have been convinced enough about him to build a side around him. He's not brilliant at tracking back as well. So I think I think he'd be good in the Premier League. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but I just think with a bit of work ethic around him, people tracking back, and a bit more space, I think he'd be very good. But it's just never worked out. Carl, were there ever any post-Forest Derby games where the post-match celebrations were over the top? Can't think of any, Robbie Savage. Okay, we don't need to dwell on that. But thank you, Dominic. Was I at the? I was at the O2. Yes, I was for Froch Kessler. Yes. You didn't say hello. Maybe you're concentrating on other things. Okay. Sense says that Brian Clough did commentate with Darren Fletcher for a short spell. Fletcher talks about it. Fair enough. Was that a Forest game, though? Because honestly, it's gone out of my memory. If that's the case. Forest Derby score prediction. Tough. I think it'll be really tough because Rooney, whatever you say, he's obviously doing a good job there as Derby manager to keep them in touch. I know obviously they've lost a couple of players, Shinnie today or yesterday, and Jackie Elker as well. So we wait to see how many how many players are left by the time we get to the City Ground next weekend. But Forest obviously playing really well. I'm going 2-0 Forest. Callum, who was the best and worst manager to interview in your time covering Forest? Well, worst was Billy Davies' second time round. But bizarrely, he'd been near the top first time round. I mentioned this in a previous chat on the channel. He was really good first time round to deal with. Got on well with him, I think. I would say got on well with him. Used to chat to him for a long time off the record. But yeah, best manager to interview. Joe Kinnear was fun to interview because you never knew what you were going to get. Martin O'Neill, I mentioned a few minutes ago, an absolute thrill. Sean O'Driscoll just learnt so much. Okay, fair enough. It's bizarre. How could I forget that? Danny Sonner would have been, he was a Paul Hart signing, wasn't he? So that would have been about 01, 02. Unless I wasn't at the game for some reason, but genuinely I don't remember, which would be a shame. All right, I think we might leave it there. Thank you for all your comments. There's been loads and loads and loads of them. I've got through as many as I can. I did say to my Chippers Club members that if I saw your comment, I would answer it. Oh, here's one from a long time ago. Jacob, any Neil Warnock stories? Well, one that he nearly became the Forest manager, obviously, when who was that fullback nearly signed from Huddersfield? Not Danny Simpson. Lee Peltier, that's right. Lee Peltier had signed, and there were pictures, weren't there, of Warnock at the training ground, and then he pulled out for whatever reason. If memory serves, Gary Brazil got it for the rest of the season, or certainly for a spell afterwards. There's also a spell when Dean Smith was recommended to Fowers as potentially being a good person to be manager. Dean Smith was at Walsall at the time, so it was before Brentford, but he was doing good things with Walsall and had done for 2 or 3 years. They played good football and they were having some success comparatively. But Fowers had never heard of him, so they didn't approach Dean Smith. There we are. He's had great success ever since. But there we are. Anyway, yes. Peltier, says Mike. Thank you, Mike. I got there in the end. Perkier says that Games Network, when I think he means Peltier. So there we are. Thank you for that. Thank you for all of your comments. As I say, if you want to join Chippers Club, link is in the description below. Thank you for persevering for the whole hour or so. If you want to make a donation, you can via Super Chat, which is go to the comments. There's the $sign. Click on that. You can make a donation and help the channel going forward as well. Thank you for all of your comments. Thank you to you for watching. As I say, we'll do another one in the coming weeks and months. So store up those questions. And as always, get in touch. And appreciate all of your thoughts, your comments, and your thanks and everything. Have a great evening. We will chat soon. Adios, everybody.